Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dave MacLeod is a professional all-around climber based in the Highlands of Scotland. Dave has been engaged in climbing for 27 years and has successfully conquered challenging boulders, sport climbs, and mixed climbs, including free solo climbs on routes that have really cool names like Rhapsody, Project Fear, and Anubis 12, recognized as one of the most arduous mixed climbs globally. Wow. Dave has also established a reputation for his expertise in training and improvement within the climbing community. He possesses an undergraduate degree in sports science and physiology, a master's degree in sport and science in exercise science, and a master's degree in human nutrition. With a blogging and vlogging career spanning 15 years, his 2 books, 9 out of 10 Climbers Make the Same Mistakes, and Make or Break, Dave has achieved international acclaim as a top-selling author on training and injury prevention in climbing. When not engaged in climbing, Dave dedicates his time to studying and writing about sports science and nutrition, and also enjoys spending quality time with his wife, Claire, and their daughter, Freida. You can find Dave on his website at www.davemacleod.com. Dave MacLeod, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
It's really great to have you. It was a total accident in the way that I found you. I believe I was searching some information about a guest that I had hosted a few weeks ago. His name is Paul MacLeod. The last name was not spelled the same way. I must have put Carnivore or Keto or something in the title because he is like basically a rancher in Alberta, Canada, not necessarily like super well known in the world for many things. And I didn't put the location Alberta, so yours popped up as the first thing. I'm like, okay, same guy. I don't think so. Let's click on this website. I see you on your own website hanging from this giant rock with like no ropes, nothing underneath you. And I'm like, who is this guy? And I start researching you and watching your YouTube videos, the way you explain diet, how you've come around to using ketogenic and eventually carnivore diets, the way you explain the science and your own anecdote was fascinating. I'm so honored to have you here on the show. So glad I found you.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I've actually listened to your podcast periodically for quite a long time, as I do many other nutrition podcasts. But I'm sort of aware that although I'm a nutritionist myself, I don't really interact that much in the world of the low carb, ketogenic, or carnivore diets. I kind of lurk, and I read a lot of research, and I do post a lot on my own channels, although I'm not kind of primarily known for nutrition. I'm primarily known as a rock climber.
Yeah, well, I think it's a cool convergence of those two things. You've been on, obviously, several podcasts. You've been on with Stephen DeMitt. We've had him on our show. He's awesome to talk to. You've been on Allie Houston's show that was a little bit more centered towards kind of diet and nutrition. And it is an interesting convergence. And you have a very unique opportunity to talk to people in your community. Again, it's not the thing that you're leading with, but I wonder if you've noticed the same thing. Like when we do our show, if we do episodes about exercise or foot health or running, or you name the topic, the ones that we get the most questions about and the most interest about tends to be diet. I kind of notice that when you're taking questions on your YouTube, you don't plan exactly these topics, you're just answering questions. They tend to lean towards nutrition. Are you noticing that that's kind of increasing as far as like awareness and interest in people?
Yeah, I mean, especially within rock climbing, nutrition has always been quite central for one primary reason, which is that rock climbing is such a weight-dependent sport. And so nutrition has always been on climbers' minds if they're trying to optimize performance, because they're always trying to be pretty lean on the whole. And actually, the higher up the rock climbing grading scale you get, or if you're trying to be competitive and actually participate in formal competitions in climbing, trying to be as lean as you possibly can is quite a challenge, and lots of professional rock climbers actually exist on a bit of a knife edge between being at a healthy weight and having RED-S, relative energy deficiency in sport, and that's been a big problem, especially in the competition world. Lots of young athletes who are really pretty thin and really light, then later stopping competing, and after they finish competing, kind of almost coming out and saying, I had a real problem with disordered eating at the time I was competing. So this has always been on the radar of climbers for that reason. But also, I think as as climbers and mountaineers, people who just spend a lot of time in the outdoors, um, it tends to be composed of a lot of folk who really care about nature and the environment. And so that aspect, and environmental consciousness, has also made climbers interested in food and also how food is produced. So there's all of those things. And increasingly in the past 10 years, I guess like all sports with the growth of social media, people are really dialing down into the details, and they're interested in their training. They're spending a lot of time trying to optimize their training, and they understand that nutrition is a huge part of that. And so they're getting more and more interested in the details. And the big thing about social media, as you know, is that it's quite a polarized landscape. So a lot of people are coming to this, and they don't know whether they should be eating lots of fruits and vegetables, or whether they should be eating lots of meat and eggs and dairy, or avoiding those foods, and they're quite like unsure who to listen to. So whenever I have said anything about nutrition online, even just a small comment, it always gets a lot of interest, and so I end up having long discussions online and offline with lots of people about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's good that you're willing to talk to people about that and bring up, different topics or differences of opinion. Climbing, in my opinion, kind of was a little bit more popularized with the release of the movie Free Solo. Dawn Wall was another fantastic climbing movie that came out, and I think it brought a lot of attention to the climbing world. And you see, his name is Alex Honnold, I believe, and you see him kind of cooking Honnold, cooking in vans, and it's, lots of the vegetables, and he's bringing lots of food with him. And, I remember being the carbohydrate plant-based kind of fed athlete, and I remember how much food I had to eat, and you just think that's like the best way. This guy's super, lightweight, like you said. You need to be light to climb a wall. He's climbing this giant wall in Yosemite and doing it without ropes, so that must be the right way, right? Like, it's just kind of an easy assumption for a lot of people.
Yeah, and the other thing is, with my own personal story, is that I've also gone on the same journey as sounds like you have, and many others have, where I've written about training for online since 2006. I wrote a blog for many years, and then much later on, I started a YouTube channel, and I just post on social media in general as a professional athlete. And I've been through a big journey with nutrition myself. Struggling to maintain a lean body weight, and having other health problems along the way. Not always having very good mood, having a bit of mild depression at times. And so I've spoken about all those things online. And so people have actually seen me in real time make a transition from a sort of standard, what used to be considered a standard athlete's diet, which was fairly healthy, as you would consider fairly healthy, as in whole food, but it was 50-60% carbohydrate, pretty low in fat, and pretty moderate in protein. And for a long time, like many people, I just felt that avoiding junk food and not eating too many calories was the way forward. And so in my first book, that's my first book there, and there's a short section in it on nutrition that has those recommendations, really, to eat half your calories as carbohydrate, to avoid junk food and try to eat whole foods, and try to look after your nutrition. But that was the bottom line. So people have seen me move away from that and then move into a series of experiments, which, because I sort of live my whole life these days in public on social media, especially on YouTube, I've kind of documented them along the way. And so I guess that has been interesting for people to kind of follow along with that and see my own results as they've changed. The other interesting side to that is that I'm still a professional athlete now, and I'm 45, which is quite unusual. Not so much in climbing, and we can go into why that might be, but it still is interesting that I've been able to maintain my level in climbing, the same level as I was when I was 25 and 35. And I do think that nutrition has played a role in that.
Mm. Wow, so interesting. So on that note, one of the last YouTubes you made, you were taking questions from the audience, and one of the questions was, would you make any revisions in any of the books you've read? And that was the big thing that you had revised. You sound like a modern day Tim Noakes, my friend.
Yeah. Well, I remember Tim Noakes talking about that in his book, The Law of Running. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's just important to feel if you've changed your mind about things. I mean, one of the things I was saying in that video was that um, I wouldn't go as far as to say the advice that I'd formerly given about nutrition before I'd actually formally studied nutrition really in any great depth. I don't think it was incorrect. It's just that there is another context. I mean, I think we all have to recognize that most athletes today still use a high carbohydrate diet and still perform at a very high level. Like the majority by far of athletes still eat that way, and we kind of have to recognize that. It's just that that context possibly doesn't apply to everyone. And I mean, one of the big things that I've tried to get across in all this the content that I produce related to nutrition is that there are often several different ways to get to the same place. I mean, for example, I've done lots of experiments with diet experiments with fat loss and have found excellent results with fat loss with a very high carbohydrate, like 80% carb, very low fat diet, and also the exact opposite, 80% fat and next to no carbohydrate. So those two extremes can work. I mean, I have a preference, and I can tell you about those experiments and how they went and why I would definitely prefer the high fat version to the high carb version. But you can still get to the same place. And I did. I mean, for 20 years as an adult, almost 20 years, I ate a high carb diet myself. And although I would say I struggled with weight, I struggled with mood, I struggled with skin issues, I still was able to function, and I still was able to climb at a world class level. It's just that when I switched and started to experiment with things like the ketogenic diet and the carnivore diet, I would say that just gave me a little bit more of a performance advantage and a health advantage, and it just made the whole job of managing my body weight and my performance a lot easier.
Yeah, that's so well said. People like Professor Bart K, that talk about combining fats and carbohydrates together into diet. That's what really gets problematic. And yes, you can go low fat, high carbohydrate, and especially with weight control. When we're talking just about kind of weight control, you can bring your weight down. That will work. You might become malnourished. You might have other issues that come along with that. You could also go low carbohydrate, be high fat. That will also work. But if you're combining those fuel sources, like a standard American diet, a standard, United Kingdom diet over there, that's where you're going to run into lots of different problems. And I do want to deep dive into nutrition with you, but I also want to hear a few of your climbing stories. What was it like to get into climbing? What was the gnarliest climb you've ever done? I mean, I think Free Solo came out 5 years ago. I watched it when it came out. My palms might still be sweaty from watching it that long ago. I don't do well with heights, so I don't know how you can handle some of the situations you get yourself in.
Yeah. I'm 45. I started climbing when I was 15. I come from Glasgow. It's the biggest city in Scotland. But it's just on the edge of the Highlands of Scotland. So the mountains are not far away. And so I was lucky to cycle out of Glasgow on my bike and discover the mountains. And I remember going to this cliff called Dumbarton Rock, which was not far away from Glasgow, and seeing these two climbers on the wall, hanging, trying to make some moves, and they weren't getting very far, and I could see they were struggling to make any progress. And I was just standing watching them. I'd never seen rock climbers before, and I just was kind of transfixed. I think I was at the right age, 15 years old, where something in your life is going to come along and it's going to grab you and make you think, wow, that's interesting, I'll follow that. And so it just came at the right moment. So I just stood there and I said, whatever that climb is, I'd love to do that climb. That just looks amazing. And I didn't know at the time that was actually the hardest rock climb in Scotland.
Wow.
So by just that coincidence, my very first climbing goal was a really hard piece of climbing. And, once I found out that was the case, that it was such a hard climb, it was kind of too late to reel back. It was just a bit of a dream that was set in my head, So I started kind of working towards that. Eventually did that climb. And in Scotland, if you're a climber, because we have quite a mixed climate. We have a lot of rain. We have, the famous thing was 4 seasons in one day in Scotland. So the weather's all over the place. So you tend to do a bit of everything. So some days it's good to go rock climbing and bouldering, which is short, technical, very hard climbing. Sometimes it's better to go soloing in the mountains because it's dry and sunny. Sometimes it's better to go ice climbing. And yeah, our ice climbing, when it's good, is just amazing. For example, on my YouTube channel, I've got a video of soloing a 1,500-foot ice climb on the north face of Ben Nevis, which is it's an incredible place to be because the ice that forms in Scotland tends to form differently from a lot of other places in the world, where it's literally a frozen waterfall. Like there's a waterfall flowing off the edge of a cliff that freezes solid, and you climb that with your ice axes and your crampons. But in the north faces in Scotland, we tend to have the cliff is wet from the rain, and then it will suddenly freeze and it will snow on it, and so it sticks to it, and then it will rain again, and then it will snow again and rain again, and so you end up with like ice that's kind of like polystyrene stuck to everything, and it covers all the rock. But it's really nice to climb. You get first time placements with your ice axes, so you're just going up this big vertical sheet of ice that covers the whole cliff. Everything's white, and it's just beautiful to climb. So you can just climb for hundreds and hundreds of meters, and it's actually relatively easy, but it's hard to find any protection to attach anything to attach a rope to. So sometimes it's actually safer just to climb on your own, because if you're roped to a partner and one falls, then maybe you both fall.
Wow. I got a sense of that, and I was watching some of your videos. Your videos are very well done. I remember the name. What was the name of the climb again? Ben Nevis?
Yeah, a route called Orion Face on Ben Nevis.
Okay.
Yeah. It was actually climbed a long time ago. It's not a particularly hard route, but just going to go and climb it solo. It kind of, from someone was filming me climbing it with a drone, and it looks like really kind of big and dramatic, and that is how it feels when you're on it. You just feel like you're a tiny dot on this big face. That's one of the best things about climbing, is that the mountains always humble you. You're just this little vulnerable person sort of scraping your way up this big ice cliff that just feels huge, and the drop below you is huge.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, one of the things, like if you climb in the Alps, and I recall like climbing on the north face of the Eiger in Switzerland, and on the sort of steepest part of that face, and there's a lot of rockfall on the cliff. So actually being on the steepest part is safer because you're out of the way of the rockfall. It just goes past you in the air. So I remember seeing a block the size of a fridge freezer fly past me, and it just drops and drops and drops until you can't see it anymore. Then you hear this little speck as it hits the ground, so many hundreds of meters below you. So the scale of big rock faces is something that's really, really amazing.
It looks incredible. Again, you'll never catch me up there. The video that I saw, I believe it was dry, so it must have been one of those dry, sunny days. You were doing it free solo. You said that the route that you were taking was an easier route, and you could see that there's big holes. I wouldn't call it easy by any means, but you are doing it free solo. And so, even if it is a quote-unquote easier route, the consequence of making a mistake, obviously, is quite high. What does it feel like? Yeah. Obviously, again, in the movie, you're in the video, you stop and you say, like, I'm in this place. I know I still have 1,000 more moves to do. What is it like to feel that sense of, I don't know, like presence? Like you have to just focus on this one next move. I don't know if you can replicate presence like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think rock climbing does lend itself to helping you get into that sort of flow state, really, of feeling that the only thing that matters in your entire world is the next hold. You can't think about what's hundreds of meters above you. You don't know what's hundreds of meters above you. You have to take every move as it comes, every foothold. And with rock climbing, as you're taking each handhold, as soon as you reach and you place your hand on a hold, if it's on real rock, you're really feeling for the texture of the rock under your fingers. So as you take a handhold, your mind is just thinking about how the rock feels under your fingers, the friction, and how to place your fingers on the hold, how to grip the hold, and how secure it feels. And it's the same when you place your feet. So the action of moving from hold to hold just keeps you very, very centered in the present in that moment. And when you're climbing solo is a funny thing. It's not something that's well suited to everyone. To be honest with you, even in the climbing world, it's slightly controversial, more so than it ever used to be. It used to be pretty normal. Like if you were a rock climber, being the idea that you should be able to solo at an easier level than your maximum grade is sort of par for the course, really. But today, it's actually more controversial. People think it's like, well, some people think it's irresponsible. You shouldn't do it. I think they maybe don't really understand much about rock climbing if they think that. But it's maybe not for everyone. So you have to have a level. You do have to have a level of confidence in your own ability. And you have to have an ability to commit to the situation you're in, to realize that once you start and you're going up, you're committed, and to be able to be relaxed about that. And you have to kind of think, well, now I'm climbing. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen. But it's not as if you're resigned to things not going well. You should not be there if you feel like there's really any significant chance of you not being able to get up the climb. But also when you're free soloing, you never really should do a move that you couldn't climb down.
Interesting.
And I have done that before, climbed for hundreds of meters, and then there would be something slightly unusual happened, like the weather is not looking so good, or I come across a block which is wobbly and loose and it's not safe to pull on, and I'll just down climb the whole thing.
Wow. Is that harder? That's got to be way harder.
It is a little bit harder if you're not used to it, but that's another aspect of your training, if you like, as a rock climber, that you have to be good at. If you do that kind of climbing, you really have to be good at down climbing, almost up to the same level as you can climb up.
Wow. That is absolutely fascinating. Did you ever have a moment? I never really thought about this, but did you ever have a moment where you were halfway up and you started to feel like I can't get up and I can't get down, like a sense of panic?
Never when I've been soloing. No, I think if that had happened to me, then I would consider that I would have made a major mistake to ever put myself in that situation. The closest I've ever had to that happening was, again, when I was on Ben Nevis, climbing in winter on ice. But when I was really young, when I was like 18, I'd only been climbing a few years. But I was quite confident ice climbing. But I just didn't have that rounded experience to be able to relax and stay in the present. So one of the things with soloing is that you kind of get into a rhythm. You're moving up, and it's easy not to be scared because you're still taking another hold and moving up. So you're like, with every move, every second, you're getting closer to the top. And you're like, this is working, it's all working. And it just keeps you focused on the next move. So I did this section where I climbed over a free hanging icicle that was pretty steep and quite hard. And I remember climbing over it thinking, I would not like to try and climb back down that. I could do it in extremis, but I really don't want to have to climb down that. And then as I climbed up this slightly easier section above, this sort of ramp of ice, I came to another steep section, like a little vertical section, just to get over into the easy snow that led to the top of the mountain. And with the way Ben Nevis is shaped, it's like a big humpbacked sort of dome with a steep north face. So if it snowed, there's a big area of plateau on the top that gets a huge dump of snow. And if the wind changes or it gets up, all of that snow just gets transported and dumped over the north face. And the wind was starting to move. So there was just plumes of spindrift snow just pouring down the cliff. And it just started. And because it funneled down the line of this ice climb, that's why it's there, is because it's a kind of drainage point, if you like. There's almost like a river of snow just pouring off this steep bulge that I had to climb. And I kept going round the corner trying to climb it, and the snow was like piling up against my chest and pushing me away from the wall. And you can't look up because you're getting a face full of snow. And my hands were getting very, very numb. And so I kept reversing back around the corner to this little alcove where I could hide. And it was the having to stop and be almost distracted by the thought of like my position and how committed I felt. And all of a sudden, I was soloing a hard climb in winter for the first time. And so I started to feel that in my mind. And that was a time where it did start to feel stressful. I was able to stay on top of it because I had enough experience to say, well, what's going to happen here? I'm either going to lose my cool and then everything's going to get a lot worse, or I'm going to stay calm and I'm going to keep waiting until that spin drift calms down a little bit, and then I'm going to move on. And if things get really, really bad, I'll just have to downclimb.
Wow.
And I'll just have to make it work.
Wow.
And so the climbing is great like that, where you have situations that are kind of extreme, but often your choices from moment to moment are still quite simple. And if you're able to boil it down to the simple choices, and you're like, well, which choice is it? And it's like, yeah, I'm going to wait for a bit. And in the end, I could climb through, and it was absolutely fine. Yeah.
That's bananas, dude. That is crazy. What an amazing combination of events, and to feel like, yeah, you can't look up, you can't look down. Snow's literally pushing you away from the wall. Like, tricky spot, man. Your ability to think in stressful times must be off the charts. You must have like an amazing skill to be able to do that because of getting into these situations. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think I think there is some truth to that. I definitely find that outside of climbing, that particularly in times that are become kind of stressful for some reason, I do find that it's almost like my brain has a mode where I can become more calm, like really calm, if the situation becomes very stressful, because it's a response. It's like everything's kind of getting to the edge of control. Something's going wrong. Like I remember it when I was a passenger in the car when we had a car crash, and the car just started spinning all over the road. And I just really clearly remember just entering this really clear mindset of just seeing, like, oh, we're going to hit that, no, we're going to hit that, no, we're going to hit that, as we were spinning. But it's almost like I was viewing it from the outside of my body, and I was very, very calm. And I remember afterwards, like, we were fine, like we hit a tree and wrote the car off, but we were fine. But I remember afterwards thinking, wow, I got more calm in that moment. It was like a switch was flicked, and that brought back memories of that happening all the time in climbing. Because although I would say that almost all of my climbing is really quite safe, you are putting yourself regularly in situations that feel quite close to the limit. But the idea with all types of climbing really is that you know where that limit is, and you go right up very close to it, but you know where it is and you never go over it. And occasionally you get it slightly wrong and you maybe go a little bit too close to it or slightly over it and get away with it. But that's not really in the plan. Hard rock climbing is not about being reckless or irresponsible or taking big risks with your life. That's just not what like 99% of rock climbers want to do.
Yeah.
But you are going into situations that do feel quite scary, even though there's a lot of that. You usually have many ways to get out of the situation you're in.
Interesting. Wow. I did want to ask you about your book. Besides the part about nutrition that we can talk about, what are some of the mistakes that most climbers make that you decided to write about in your book?
Well, I wrote that book because it was from a period in 2006 I did quite a hard rock climb. It was the first rock climb in the world to get the grade of E11, and it kind of made me a bit more better known as a rock climber. And after that period, I was going around the UK doing lots of coaching with climbers, and I just found myself saying the same things over and over again. And from that, it came the idea of a book. And what I realised, at the time, I had just graduated from sports science as well, and I was reflecting on everything I'd learned in my sports science degree. And what I could really see was that a lot of the studies on tweaking small aspects of training were not inconsequential, but they weren't really big effects. It wasn't like big hitter things. And really, it was more behavioral aspects of people's lifestyle and routine, their habits basically, that really determined that those were the big things that really made people go from like one level to, stratospheric improvement. and it was those things that I was saying to people. For example, one of the fundamentals of hard rock climbing is your fingers can never be strong enough. You have to have really strong fingers to be able to hang on small holds with as much force as possible. So the very best rock climbers can hang on one hand on a 20 millimeter edge and do a one arm pull up on that. And actually the best rock climbers today can do that with a 10 or maybe even 20 kilo dumbbell in the other hand. So they can hang well more than their body weight on one hand on a small edge. So one of the ways we train that is on a hangboard, just a wooden edge, and we're just doing dead hangs on that very regularly. And so when I was going around coaching, I was talking to all these climbers, and I was showing them how to use the hangboard, and I'd ask them, like, do you have one at home? And a lot of people, even at that time, would say, yes, I've got one at home. And I would say, how often do you use it? And the most common answer was twice, as in twice ever. Sure. And I just found that really interesting. And it's like they understand that the tool is important. They have the tool, but they're not using it. So why is that? And they would say things like, well, it's in my garage and it's got all this mess around it, or it's a bit cold down there, or it's away from the family and it's a bit antisocial to go down there. And I realized that that was really the determinant of what was holding people back, was if they took their hangboard and took it out of their garage and put it in their kitchen, then their trajectory might change. And other things like just actually spending time with athletes in your sport who are much better than you. Simple things like that. I mean, that's just a brain dead simple thing to do, but the habits of other people just totally rub off on you. And I've seen that with like my own climbing partners. I mean, I remember going through this whole phase when I was at university. When I started university, I was not climbing at a high level yet. I was still just a relative novice. And I went as a young student in the same way that all the other students went. I was like going to the pub a lot, and I would drink beer, and I would do some training, and then, just stop and have a laugh. And all those things were great. But by the time I finished university, I was still kind of spending time with all the same people, but I'd made a lot of progress in my rock climbing, and I'm starting to look at doing the hardest routes. And I just started to realize like what a massive difference there was from the people that I spent time with as a climber when at the start of university versus at the end. And what a big influence that potentially could have on my own behavior, what was normal, And I remember climbing with a climbing partner who had bipolar disorder.
Wow.
And we were on some hard winter climbs, trying new routes, stuff that had never been climbed before. And so when you're doing a new route that's hard, you're kind of pushing into the unknown. You don't know if it's possible. You're moving away from your protection below that's clipped to the rope. And the higher you go, the bigger fall you're going to have. And so it feels like psychologically, you have to be really forceful to want to push on. And I remember my climbing partner, when he would have his mania days, he was just like on fire. And it was amazing. Like, you would watch him climb, and you just had this feeling, we're going to get to the top today. So you're swinging leads, like he would lead a pitch, a rope length, and then he makes an anchor, and then you lead the rope length of the climb. And so when there's that energy between you, you just feel like everything's working, and it usually does. Wow. But when he had his lower days, I remember actually being on this new route in the Cairngorms, and it was a blizzard, and I was almost at the top of this route, but I was also at the hardest part. And I remember him shouting like, the weather's getting really bad, let's just abseil off. And I just thought, yeah, actually, let's just absolutely off. And I always remember regretting that, like, and thinking, I think if he'd just said, keep going, I would have kept going. Yeah.
Wow.
So things like that. My book was really filled with all of the examples of how lifestyle choices and training choices can set your direction in training and then lead to quite wildly different results.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. And perfect segue into nutrition. Tell us about how you came to learn about this quite different way of eating, ketogenic and eventually, carnivore diets, especially with like formal training and nutrition that you got, which surely would have been pushing a different way than where you ended up.
Yeah, yeah. I actually started, well, I did a master's degree in nutrition. I returned to university to do that in 2016. And that was after, a year after I'd first experimented with ketogenic diet. And so that by that point, I was in my late 30s. And I would say in, throughout my 20s, I did what most athletes who struggle to be lean but need to be lean like do, which is I would intermittently restrict my calories quite heavily, and I would walk around just a bit hungry most of the time. and and what was always interesting to me was that it didn't matter whether I was at the upper or lower range of my normal weight distribution, my normal weight range. I would be just as hungry at either end of the range, and that didn't seem to make sense to me. Like it felt like if I'm like 5 or 10 pounds heavier, I should be a little bit less hungry.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem to work like that. I was just always hungry. And I just thought, well, I just didn't have an explanation for that. But it was always a little thing in the back of my head that was a little bit like, there's something I don't understand here. um, but that strategy did work for me in my 20s. But I found that once I got to 30, 32, 34, it seemed to take more calorie restriction to get less result. And I found that my weight was just creeping up despite trying harder and harder to keep it down. And I reached a point where I was like, okay, I need to go to square one and look at this problem properly. Because, I mean, I regularly, I'm a professional athlete, so I regularly have every year or really constantly, you're constantly sort of appraising the whole of your approach to training and saying, out of all the suite of components of things that are holding my performance up, where are the strong areas, where are the weak areas? And they shift and change from year to year. Some years I might have, a little bit stronger shoulders and body. Some years I might have a bit stronger fingers, depending on injuries and training and climbs that I've been doing. But I just found that more and more it was just body fat percentage. It was just creeping up, and I knew that was the main factor that was holding me back. That's not the case for some other rock climbers. I think good rock climbers are sometimes self-selected for those who find it easy to be lean. But that wasn't me, so I was a little bit of an outlier for that. So I was having difficulty with that. And that was what made me try the ketogenic diet. And I can't remember what the trigger was to try that diet specifically, but I thought, I'll try it for a month. The first time I tried it, I just didn't adhere properly. I didn't get carbs low enough. And so like I went down a pound and didn't feel very good. Felt a bit, the classic carb fueled athlete, slightly deprived of carbs. So I just didn't feel very good. And then after 4 weeks, I gave it up. And then about 6 months later, after reading a bit more, I thought, no, I can see that a lot of people are saying in the initial adaptation, if you're moving away from years and years on a high carb diet, you possibly need to go in pretty hard with a sustained period of carb restriction. And 1 month would be the absolute minimum to even come back to feeling normal. And you're looking at more like several months. So I thought, well, okay, let's do like 6 weeks or 2 months or something, and let's be stricter on the carbohydrate. And it was good because I was going on a trip to Switzerland to go bouldering on my own, So I was away from family. I was away from a normal food culture. I was staying on my own in a little apartment, so I could buy food and only have that food in the place I was staying. And so I adapted to a ketogenic diet there. And that time, I had a savage headache for 5 days straight, the first 5 days. Then for the first 2 weeks, I just felt slightly weird. And then in the second 2 weeks, I just felt better and better. And partly, and I say better and better in multiple ways, like I felt better. I also did notice that my mood was lifting. And my performance was getting better because I was losing weight. I was losing excess fat. So, I lost 2 or 3 kilos, which is a lot. I mean, I can feel like I have my training wall at home in the garage behind me here. And if my weight fluctuates by 1 pound, like I can tell how much my weight's fluctuated by to the pound based on how I climb on the board outside.
Wow.
Before I even go on I can just tell exactly. It's very, very sensitive to weight. So I'd lost like 2 or 3 kilos, and it made a big difference to my climbing. But the real kind of light bulb moment was, for all the years I'd been a climber, I'd always be quite anxious about the calories that I would take out to the crag or out on the mountain with me during the day. I would always take 1,000, 1,500 calories with me for a long day out. Just lots of carbs and sugar mainly. Usually some proper like food, like a big sandwich or something that has some meat and some vegetables in it, but a lot of carbs as well. So I'd taken boiled eggs, and I remember going out and I was climbing on really hard stuff for several hours until I was quite exhausted. And then after I couldn't do the hardest stuff anymore, I was going around this forest looking at all these other climbs, all these other boulders. So I was like clambering over boulders up and down hillsides for the whole day. And it was almost dark, and I got in my rucksack and I put my head torch on, and my box of boiled eggs fell out of my bag, and I went, oh, I forgot to eat my lunch. And that was like the moment where I was like, that has never happened ever. So that was and it sounds like a small thing, but it was a really big deal. That's when I knew there's something different here, of that freedom from the hunger. And I realized that I'd done a lot of hard stuff that day, but I'd had a steady energy supply despite the fact it had been 8 hours plus since I ate a couple of boiled eggs that morning. So that's what made me think, I think I'm going to follow this for a little bit longer.
It's so awesome. Yeah. When you start getting to that level, for me, it was cycling, and you just go on a ride. You don't think about when you're going to eat, if you need to stop, what you ate before. You just go on a ride. It could be 10 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. It could be 2 hours or 3 hours. Like you have that constant energy source, and it feels so amazing to transition over if you give it enough time. I mean, I just saw another article in a cycling magazine that was based on a study that just came out that, people that ate low fat versus low carb had no difference in VO2 max when they tested after 5 weeks of being on these particular diets. It's like, you can't do that after 5 weeks. You're not going to see anything. You need a longer time to adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, like, the weight thing was just such a huge thing. That would be really different for, if you're comparing like an endurance cyclist who's already lean, going from a high carb diet to a ketogenic diet. I mean, they may not see any massive improvement. It may only be a tiny improvement, but it might take them a year or maybe more than that to see anything. For me, it was a little bit different. The weight thing, because I had excess fat, because it matters so much in my sport, and the ketogenic diet helped me to get leaner. That made that was a big driver really to sort of fuel my interest in it.
Yeah, exactly.
But it just it seemed to kind of tick all the boxes that you would want. So I felt like I was eating more food, like, when I say I felt like, I could track the calories and see that I was eating plenty of calories. And I wasn't hungry. I wasn't having the energy swings. And yet I was also leaner. That just seemed to be the kind of best of all worlds. And in the period since then, I've done several experiments of moving back and forth between lots of different diets, like going back to a kind of standard Western, mixed diet, but still with quite, whole foods, um, to like a vegetarian, almost vegan, 80% carb diet, to carnivore diets, to different versions of ketogenic diets. Because, like, I always kind of wonder, like, maybe you try something once and it coincides with a period where all of your training just came together and you had a good performance. And so that just makes you think, oh, that's the best diet in the world. I'll just keep following it. And then you think, oh, every other diet is just not as good. But I thought, it's easy to jump to that conclusion a bit prematurely. So I have since then tried many different diets. And we can talk about that. That's also been interesting.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I love the way you experiment with all of that stuff, and you really take the scientific approach of not trying to, use, like you said, correlation be causation. Those are two different things, and you can't say that your diet was good, but also so was your training. So was it the diet? You don't really know, but you can further test it. And at the end of the day, you are the only person that matters the most in testing those things. And eventually, that testing got you to a carnivore diet. Is that right? Like, how did you decide to try that?
Well, I suppose like a lot of people, the first time I ever became aware that the carnivore diet was even a thing was listening to a lecture by Amber O'Hearn. And I remember like that was after I'd been doing a ketogenic diet for some time. And I remember having that first reaction of like, only meat? Like, oh no, that's just ridiculous. It's just taking way too far. Like, why? Why would you even do that? So I did take some time to listen to Amber's explanation of why that related to her with psychological health conditions, and the difference that made to her. But that did make me think, well, that's interesting because like I definitely noticed a significant mood improvement with the ketogenic diet. But it also, through doing a keto diet, one of the things I did was also experiment with a bit of fasting. At first, I used to do like 36-hour fasts here and there. That was quite interesting. Then I did a couple of 2-day fasts. And then I did a 7-day fast, just because at that time, there was a lot of discussion online about fasting. Walter Longo's research was coming out and he was talking a lot about fasting. And I was curious about it. And I was curious about this. I mean, I studied physiology. I'm very interested in physiology as an exercise in itself, independent from my own health journey and performance. I'm just interested to see how the body copes with different circumstances. So the idea that people were saying that they actually felt fine on a 7-day fast, or they actually felt better later in the fast, that was just a pure curiosity for me. So I remember doing a 7-day fast, and one of the other health problems that I've had my whole life is quite bad eczema. It only affects my feet, but it did give me constant pain. I spend a lot of time either in very small, tight rock shoes, which are kind of sweaty and horrible, and that aggravates it, or big mountaineering boots. And I remember I used to have to play psychological games with myself to not think about having to put my mountaineering boots on in the morning, because like the first half an hour walking in them was just horrible, just painful, every day, and feet are bleeding and all that, and it's just not good. So it was a health issue I had that I just thought would never change and I would have it all my life. When I did a fast, in 2 days, it just disappeared. All the anger, all the redness and inflammation on my feet, you could just see the redness just go. And so within 2-3 days, all the broken skin was starting to heal over. And by the 7th day, my feet just looked like normal feet for the first time since I was a baby. And so that gave me, so it returned as soon as I started to eat again. But that did give me then a clue. It's like, okay, this eczema has some connection to nutrition, my gut, or digestion. I don't know what the connection is. It could be multiple things. I guess a microbiome researcher might tell you it's related to the microbiome. Someone else might say it's related to gut barrier function and having a proper actual barrier. And there's lots of other, some people might say it's an autoimmune reaction and how that's mediated, whether that's related to the gut barrier or microbiome. There's many possible mechanisms, but the fact is I now knew that it was modifiable. It was possible for it to go away. And at that time, there was more people starting to do the carnivore diet, and I could see that they were saying that, in particular, those who had autoimmune conditions were seeing remission from those with a carnivore diet. So that did help to make me think, right, I'll do that. So I did that for 6 weeks, and yet in 2 days for the eczema to disappear. For the duration, I did it. So I did, I think, 6 weeks on a carnivore diet, and then returned to a mixed, plant and animal ketogenic diet. And my eczema did return. And this is going back like 4 or 5 years now. So I've done several stages of experiments. Subsequently, I did another 7-day fast, and my eczema disappeared again. But curiously, when I returned to the mixed diet, the eczema returned, but only on one foot.
Interesting.
Now, I have no explanation for that. It gave me this clue that the eczema, I think, is kind of on a knife edge between, flaring up and actually disappearing. And that made me go back to the carnivore diet again and do it for a little bit longer. So I did another round of carnivore diet for 6 to 8 weeks, I would say, and my eczema disappeared. And then I reverted to a mixed ketogenic diet again, but this time my eczema stayed away and didn't come back. And I was able to eat a whole range of vegetables, and even refined carbs, sugar, wheat, all these things, and the eczema did not return.
Wow.
And I thought, well, that's it. It's just gone into remission and it's gone. And I had that for a whole year until last spring. I did an experiment doing a vegetarian diet, 80% carb, eating lots of lentils and like high carb vegetables, potatoes, things like that. So I was eating just all carbs, and my eczema returned then. And even after I returned to a carnivore diet after that, it hasn't gone away again. So I've given myself it back,
Wow.
which is really unfortunate.
Wow. Man, and the only thing I can think of in my head is like, why, Dave? Why would you want to go back after feeling so good on carnivore to eat lentils?
Yeah, well, I do like experimenting. So, I have lots of different things I'd like to experiment with. So, one of the interesting things with body recomposition for sport is that I carry a lot of heavy rucksacks up mountains, and so I have quite big muscular legs. But for all of my hardest rock climbing goals, I need to have my whole lower body as light as possible. That extra leg muscle is not serving me, and where I need the muscle mass is in my forearms. So I've always been interested in this idea of recomposition, where you could try to selectively trim down muscle mass in areas of your body where you don't need so much muscle. And I was kind of inspired by an article written by Keith Barr and Trent Stellingwerff about this, where they talked about this idea of eating a high carb diet that would keep you out of ketosis. So it's very calorie restricted, very low protein, but it's necessarily high carb so that you stay out of ketosis, because that's very muscle sparing. So you want it to be quite catabolic. So it's quite a stressful. It's not something I recommend doing, but it was an experiment I wanted to try on myself. So yeah, it's quite a sort of stressful thing to do, and ideally you carry on with strength training in the muscles you want to keep, but then you don't do strength training in the muscles you want to allow to catabolize slightly, and hopefully you achieve a recomp. So that was actually the reason why I was doing that experiment. It didn't work for that purpose. I found that I did lose weight. I think I did lose muscle, but I found that I just lost strength in my upper body as well. And usually I can just do one arm pull up on a bar, and occasionally two if I'm at my best. But it took me the whole of last year to get back to just doing one arm pull up again. and I definitely have lost muscle around my shoulders
Wow.
and my upper back. That's good. So all these things that are really interesting. So they're risky in a way. I feel like I've almost paid a bit of a price for them.
Yeah, seriously.
Uh, but they're still interesting to do.
Yeah, it is. And if we go back to the argument earlier where it's like you do need an adaptation period, what if I like kind of conceding this. Like, what if I say, okay, fine, maybe going on a low carbohydrate diet, maybe your top end performance drops by 5%. Would you take that sacrifice to also not have eczema and have your depression drop out and not have anxiety? Like, there's so many other things that are important to people. Like, yes, as a professional athlete, you need to perform at the highest level and have strength and body fat and all this other stuff. But on a personal level, like, don't you want to like not be injured and hang out with your daughter and like have bright thoughts and a calm mind? Like there's so many other variables to it.
Yeah, that's it. At the moment, having done all of the experimenting that I have over the past 7 or 8 years, I do keep returning to the carnivore diet. I must say, quite a high protein version of the carnivore diet. Um, that to me that fulfills all of my personal desires for health and performance. It allows me to stay effortlessly lean, to not be hungry, uh, to have good mental health, to recover well from my training, um, and it also seems to have the best overall result with the eczema. I must admit that I'm not totally strict with the carnivore diet, and possibly with the eczema, it will require 100% adherence. Um, on my list again is possibly to do a little bit more fasting, just to see if that prolonged fast would be a trigger to make it go into remission again. That I can then hold that for a sustained period. So the experiments are never done.
Well, good. And I hope that is a good segue to ask you if you'd be willing to come back on the show sometime to talk about some of those other experiments. I'm finding this absolutely fascinating. The listeners on my end probably heard the sound of my phone saying that it's running out of battery. So in the meantime, I think my phone needs to get onto the carnivore diet so I can have like a little bit more energy. You and I could go all day. Like we're good. But yeah, could we have you back on to go into more depth on some of the research you've done with low carbohydrate and carnivore diets with athletes and also some of the other experiments that you've done on yourself?
Yeah, sure, anytime.
Man, I would love to continue talking to you. This is absolutely fascinating. Let's set up another time and let's do another show. For now, I just want to make sure I give you time to tell people where they can go to find you and connect with you and your work.
Yeah, the best place at the moment is YouTube. Yeah, I upload to YouTube reasonably often, and I do some deep dive videos. Like if people are interested in the ketogenic diet, I did a very, very deep dive on the ketogenic diet.
So
I covered
good.
a lot of week of research. Yeah,
That was mega, dude. That was so well done.
yeah. But I do have others. I've actually just today I'm editing a video about athletic greens. Lots of people in my audience say, "Should I take athletic greens?" So I've been doing a video about that.
I can't wait for that one. I get asked that all the time. I've got my own opinions, but I'll be very curious to hear yours as well. Have you experimented with them on yourself recently?
No, I haven't and have no intention to.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. You've got some really cool opinions about collagen and collagen supplements as well. And those are getting super popular. And I appreciate your opinions on that as well. I would recommend anybody go to your YouTube. You've got tons of great information. There's great research there. It's visually absolutely incredible to watch you climb and to learn about it as we go. It's just absolutely fascinating. So Dave, I'm so glad I've been able to find you and connect with you. You're such a cool human doing all kinds of cool stuff. I really appreciate you and everything you've done and all the experiments you do and willing to climb up giant rock faces and come back and tell the tale. So thank you so very much for everything you do, and thank you for taking the time to be on our show today. We really, really appreciate you.
Likewise, thanks very much.
It was such an honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio. Thank you so very much for continuing to listen to Boundless Body Radio. As 2023 has come to a close and we're starting another new year in 2024, I always try to reflect on not only the direction that we want to go in the future, but also how much we have grown in this last year. Our podcast has now generated well over 400,000 downloads from all over the world, and it's all thanks to fantastic listeners like yourself. I hope you are as excited for the new year as we are around here. The lineup of guests that we have coming up is absolutely staggering, and we're always striving to bring you the best content from the most amazing people in health, nutrition, and wellness. Remember that you can always head on over to our website to book a complimentary 30-minute session with us at myboundlessbody.com. On our homepage, there is a Book Now button where you can select a time to speak with us about your health and fitness plan, especially for the new year. We've absolutely loved chatting with so many of you out there to bounce ideas off each other and try to come up with plans to help you achieve specific goals. And seriously, I really do mean this. Even if it's just to say hello and introduce yourself, we absolutely love connecting with our listeners in the community. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well if you want to watch these full interviews and also shorter interviews on more specific topics that are taken from these interviews. We've gotten really great feedback over there, and it's also a really fun way to interact with people who comment. We read and reply to every single YouTube comment we get, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and leave as many comments as you like to keep the conversation going. And of course, if you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really is the best way to make sure that the podcast gets out to more listeners. Your 5-star ratings and reviews are the best way to support us here at Boundless Body, and to support the podcast at Boundless Body Radio really only takes a moment, and it's very meaningful to us. Cheers to 2024, and thank you again for listening to Boundless Body Radio.